Tonight we move from Old Testament into the New Testament and talk about Luke and John. In addition to Ray's birthday today, it is also one of my favorite authors' birthdays, Paul David Tripp. Those of you that have been in Grief Share, he's the guy with the big mustache, looks like a rat on his lip. It's really a special mustache, you got to see it. But I like his writing, and he marked the occasion of his birthday. He turned 75 today, and he marked the occasion with a poem. It's a super long poem, 10 pages, printed out, 9 actually. I would like to read you just a portion of it, okay? Portion as in 2 pages, 2.5, all right? Listen up. Everyone builds their life on a story, a grand narrative that interprets and explains history, identity, future, family, purpose, God, meaning, morality, work, desire, need, hope, and every other thing the mind can conceive. Everyone's life is shaped by a story. The story our parents told us, the story we tell ourselves, the story of our culture, the story we learn from philosophers, poets, preachers, writers, directors, theologians, politicians, bosses, protesters, painters, grandmothers. Some stories are incomplete. Some stories are a lie. Some stories are a fantasy. Some stories are true. Some stories give wisdom. Some stories attract fools. Stories have the power to captivate and control us, deceive and destroy us, enthrall and motivate us, rescue and restore us, define and identify us, guide and direct us, humble and humanize us, confront and warn us, frighten and paralyze us, enlighten and instruct us, help or harm us. You have a grand, influential story to tell. You tell it to yourself again and again in search of answers in moments of celebration, in the darkness of grief, when you're lost and lonely, when life is hard, in failure's darkness, in a quest for hope to reconcile the past, to understand the future, when decisions loom, when lost in the middle. We are all very good storytellers. But there is one story, capital S, that stands above every other story that has been written or told. Drama of sin and redemption. This is the one complete story spanning from before origins to beyond destiny. It is the old story told by saints and sinners, kings and scoundrels, giving life to the weak and strong, rich and poor, young and old, to those celebrating and those grieving, sinners and slaves, religious and agnostics, hopeful ones, and those who have given up hope. It is the only story that has the power to rescue and redeem, to save and sanctify, to crush death and give life, to renew and restore, to make the blind see, to put humility where pride once lived, to replace idolatry with worship, to reconcile the past and secure the future, to replace selfishness with gratitude, to join sinners with God. The great transcendent story begins in the annals of eternity, the Trinity laying down the great eternal plan, drama of sin and redemption. And he goes on and tells basically the whole story of the Bible in that framework of sin and redemption, sin and redemption. I don't think it's a mistake that sin and redemption, the transformation from one to the other, is not just the story that God has given us, but it's the story that was lived by every single person who wrote the story, capital S. And that's the story that we get to tell, and that's the story that we get to be part of. It is our story too, so we had better know it. And those who were used to give us the written portion of that story, we better know them as well. So tonight, as we move into the New Testament to take a look at two of the most prominent authors, Luke and John, I want you to pay attention. Some people want to know, who's your favorite author in the whole Bible? I don't have one. I like them all. Not the same, I won't lie. not the same. But I don't really think I could pick a favorite. It's like growing up when my cousin said to me, we were friends, best friends, and our mothers they were 4 girls in the family. My mom and her mom were the 2 oldest, then 7 years, then 2 more girls. These 2 were just getting married, college, still in high school, when we were already born. This aunt, her mom, was the aunt who was in my life the most. And so one day, my cousin says to me, who's your favorite aunt? Not the mom aunt. Your mom is my mom aunt, and my mom is your mom aunt. But who's your favorite aunt? So then I had to pick between one of these 2. And I did because she was my big cousin and I followed her in everything. But it really bothered me because if I had to pick, it would be the mom aunt. But I didn't want to pick because I liked them all. I didn't want to pick a favorite. That's how I feel about the authors of the Bible. I like them all, and I don't really want to pick one. But I really do like Luke and John. So let's talk about them today. Luke first. He wrote just 2 books in the Bible. 2. And yet, he wrote more than any other New Testament writer. Save that knowledge in the back of your head because somebody's going to ask you on Jeopardy one day, and that's going to win you $1 million. Who wrote most of the New Testament? Okay, not the Bible overall, the New Testament. I heard 2 different stats, 27.5% and 28% written by Luke. When did he write it? 1st century AD. So, number 1 in your non-existent notes would be this. He doesn't claim authorship overtly in the gospel, but he does refer to it in Acts, okay? So, Acts chapter 1, verse 1, Luke says, in my former book, Theophilus, I wrote about all that Jesus began to do and teach. And he is letting him know. In the gospel, I told you about Jesus. Now he's going to tell him what happened. Luke fulfilled such an important role in giving us the historical record that he did. A ton of what we know about the 1st century church comes from the book of Acts. That's incredibly important. Today, Ray's friend gave him a biography of Lincoln. I'm sure it will be a good read. Hopefully, the author did some thorough research and doesn't impose current culture over a couple of centuries ago. But no matter how well he writes, it will never match the original materials from Lincoln himself or those who were eyewitnesses that lived at the same time. Luke was not an eyewitness to Jesus' life and ministry, but he was around the ones who were, the eyewitnesses. He was able to grab first-hand accounts and then make observations himself. That makes his perspective incredibly important for us. Number 2, Luke is a Gentile writing to the Greeks. Do you give more credence to someone who is like you, from your area, or similar in experience to you? Sure you do. We all do. One time in college, I sat down in a brand new class, brand new semester, and a guy sat down next to me and we started talking, and come to find out he was from Michigan. And he wasn't from over here. He wasn't from up there. He was from right where I live, not even Detroit. You know, everybody from out of state thinks that if you live in Michigan, you live in Detroit. But when you meet somebody from Michigan, they know that not everybody is from Detroit. And so when we started to talk about it, we got so excited talking about all the areas that we both knew. And we got so excited that my friend Dan, who was sitting in front of me, teased me later about marrying the guy. And I'm like, I didn't know him, but he knew where Oxford was. And I knew where his hometown was. And it was just really fun to share common ground. Luke had that with his audience, his target audience. He wasn't one of the Jews, which was a pretty tight-knit community. He was a Gentile. He was an outsider. He was an insider to the other Gentiles. He knew Jesus and he knew them, and that counted for something. Luke is distinguished from the Jews, the circumcised, in Colossians chapter 4, verses 10 through 14. And so he seems to be easily placed there with the other Gentiles. He is, get this, the only Gentile writer of Scripture. That's a pretty big distinction to hold, too. I mean, we don't know who wrote Hebrews, so maybe. But in all likelihood, he's the only one. Number 3, as a doctor, his education lends itself to detailed storytelling. Again, Colossians 4:14. Our dear friend Luke, the doctor, and Demas send greetings. I had to go to the eye doctor again yesterday to follow up from my brush with old age a couple of months ago. And all was well, except that I couldn't see for the next 5 hours afterwards, all right? Man, when they dilate your eyes, that does a number on you. Try to read a computer screen, okay, when you can't see. Anyway, when I finally got to see the doctor for approximately 90 seconds after over an hour of waiting, he mumbled several observations to his assistant who was typing in my record. He was literally in my face, and I could not understand him. I have no idea how she did, but I also didn't know what he was looking for. She was familiar with the subject. There were obviously important details to note in the follow-up of the original problem. Now, I know that all doctors are not people. You know what I mean by that? You know what a people person is? All doctors are not people persons, okay? But most of them do get into the business to help people. And, also for the astronomical student debt and the high wage, no doubt. But they do know people. You understand that, right? That eye doctor knew a thing or two about the anatomy of an eyeball. And he knew what was normal and what wasn't normal. And so he had expertise. Luke had expertise. Okay? I'm guessing that Luke was a GP, general practitioner. I'm not saying that, I don't know that they had specialties back then, but it seems that Luke was probably a people person doctor. That's my guess, because he was really good at noticing people, and he was really good at noticing details about people. He was someone who was a natural investigator, someone who noticed the details, who knew how to ask questions and get the complete story. And that's definitely somebody you want on the writing team for the New Testament. Number 4, critics question his historical reliability, get this, due to the supernatural content and focus of his writing and the details. So they go, oh, there's no way the crowd was that big on the day of Pentecost. Really? He was there, okay? He was talking to people who were there. I know that I can't estimate a crowd, but I'm thinking you don't get away with saying it was 1,000,000 times bigger when everybody else knows exactly how many people came into that city. And it was thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people. And isn't that awesome that people have a problem with Luke because of the supernatural and the doubt over the sheer size of the crowd that he raises? It raises some skepticism in people. And I'm like, well, duh, of course it does. Luke is one of the most emphatic authors on the subject of the Holy Spirit. He is also meticulous about getting the details right. It says a lot about someone to doubt him on the basis of his work or that of the Spirit. Tells me a little bit about where you are. But we Pentecostals are a little bit used to that, aren't we? People claim that the gifts of the Spirit and Spirit baptism stopped with the first century church. Have you ever heard the term cessationism? They believe that, all that stuff stopped. So even if they acknowledge that it was legit and Luke wasn't lying right straight through his teeth, we don't believe that happens now because they don't want their faith to get messy. I think we should be reading Luke, Acts, and going, mess with us some more, Lord, right? Mess with us some more. We need more of the Holy Spirit, not less. We need more hunger for the gifts of the Spirit, not less. We need to believe for bigger crowds, not ones that we're comfortable counting. There are so many people out there who need Jesus and healing and hope for life beyond this one, especially those Luke seemed to notice more than others. That's number 5, and we've talked about this, but Luke elevated the marginalized, overlooked, and oppressed. He talks about women more than anybody else. He talks about the poor more than anybody else. He talks about slaves more than anybody else. Luke noticed people, and then he made sure that we knew Jesus noticed them too, because all he's doing is telling that story and then showing how it was lived out in Acts. It happened because Jesus brings transformation. And Luke wanted everybody to know that beyond the shadow of a doubt. He elevates the marginalized. Think about how much of our world is about pushing people down. Luke is joining Jesus in lifting people up, and that's our business too. Let's talk about John for a moment. John wrote 5 books in the New Testament: the Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and Revelation, also in the 1st century AD. Some date Revelation as late as 100, some even a couple years into the 2nd century, but in all likelihood, everything was done within that 1st century. Number 1, John is one of the 12 and the 3. One of the 12 and the 3. Everybody got all excited on Sunday by the Lions' victory and the offensive play calling of head coach Dan Campbell. Brenda, did you watch it? All right, good girl. So those of you that are not fans, let me get you up to date. Shirley? The Lions lost 2 of their last 3 games. They weren't scoring as much. They weren't seeing all of their stars involved. And so Campbell changed all of that very successfully. True, they were playing a team that was decimated by injuries, so it may not be a legitimate, win, but it still felt good. Why did Campbell do this? He knew what he wanted to see. He took responsibility himself. Who knows the team better than the coach of the team? No one. That's what Jesus did with his disciples. He did that in choosing the 12. He knew what he wanted. He knew how he wanted to use them. We all know that there were more than 12 disciples. You do know that, right? There were more. There were a lot more, and a lot more that followed them and were with him 24/7. But the 12 were chosen especially by the Lord. They would carry on the leadership of the church after Jesus returned to heaven. John was one of the 12. Luke was not. John was. But he had something even more impressive. He was also one of the 3. Can you tell me who the other 2 were? Yep. Peter, James, and John. They got special access at things like the healing of a dead girl and being present for the transfiguration. I mean, we know how awesome that must have been, right? Just because of the fact that it pretty much left Peter, who never lacked for words ever, as a blubbering idiot. I mean, we should build a tent. Shh, Peter, shh. That proximity gave them a conviction of belief that no circumstance, no fear, no threat, at least, in the case of Peter, not permanently, but none of it could take them out. They were so close to Jesus. Number 2, he was the only disciple at the cross. That tells us something about his relationship with the Lord. In the gospel, John refers to himself as the one Jesus loved. Now, we joke about that. Aw, he thought he was something, didn't he? No. He's actually being modest by not naming himself, and he's just putting it that way. But the proof is in the pudding. John was there at the trials. He was there at the cross. He was there at the tomb, and he was there at the beach on resurrection breakfast day. He developed a relationship with Jesus that was so intimate, so close, that he was comfortable laying his head on Jesus' chest at dinner time. I can't imagine. It also tells us that he had an interesting advantage over the other disciples. Jesus charged John with the care of whom? His mother. From the cross, he said, "Woman, behold your son. Son, behold your mother." And from that day on, she was taken into his house. Guess what that gave John? Insider access to somebody who knew Jesus from day one, right? That's some serious insider knowledge. So we should pay attention to what this author says and how he says it. Number 3, he was the youngest disciple and the only one to die naturally. It is thought that John was the youngest. This, by the way, explains his foot race with Peter to the tomb on Resurrection Day. John, who may have been trying to be modest intentionally without naming himself, is also, let's just say, he marks forevermore that he won the race. Twice, he says that. Twice he beat out the other guy. And here's the cool thing. What do you remember about that scene? He runs and gets there first, but does he go in? He stops, and Peter goes past him. I've never thought about it before. I've always kind of poo-pooed John for that. I'm like, oh, he got the creeps. He didn't like spiders any better than I did. Or, oh, he was scared of the tomb. Ooh, dead people. I read in my studies for this that he was giving deference to Peter as not only his elder, but as a leader among the disciples and allowing him to go first. And I think that's really a cool thought. I thought hesitation meant squeamish stomach or something, but John was showing respect. We also know, at least according to church tradition, that the rest of the 12, not Judas obviously, but the rest of them died martyrs' deaths. That's a huge part of our apologetic, right? Why would you die for a lie? You wouldn't. They didn't. But John was different. He was persecuted for sure. We know that he was exiled by the Roman emperor for a time to the island of Patmos. We know that God redeemed that time with a vision of Revelation. But it appears that he came back to Ephesus after this time out. Number 4, John was the pastor and bishop at Ephesus. Now let's revisit their history a little bit. Ephesus was founded by Paul in the mid-1st century, around 52. He had help from Priscilla, Aquila, Apollos, Timothy. They all pastored there at one point. It was a very strong church. It was an influential church covering, speaking to the entire Asia Minor area, what is now Turkey. After Paul's death, John became the pastor, and from there he served as the bishop to the area churches. So in Revelation, chapters 2 and 3, when he is writing the letters to the 7 churches, that would have had profound impact on each of those named churches because of his influence and service to those churches in his capacity as a bishop. Now, are we saying that John was important because he was the precursor of a megachurch pastor and therefore important because of that? No. We're saying John had a voice that deserved to be heard. God thought so, allowed him to pen 5 letters, 3 of which, his gospel, 1 John and Revelation, the importance of these for our doctrine and belief and preparation really for end times cannot be overestimated. All 3 are essential. There is something to be said for experience, right? Earlier I was going to say, we listen to people that are the same. So Allie and CJ will be drawn to people who have had kids. They're probably not calling me up on one of those long nights when baby won't go down and saying, "What do you do?" And I'll say, "Well, I always find that when I kick the cat out of my bed, that's how they eventually find a way to go sleep somewhere else." That isn't going to cut it, right? They're going to want to talk to somebody that's been there before. Now, do I have anything to say about parenting? I have a lot to say about parenting. Yes, I do, because I got eyeballs too. But what I know is that we are drawn to people with like experience and we learn from them. So to hear from John, who had all of this incredible experience, is incredibly important. He was with Jesus. He helped to lead the church in Jerusalem. Then he moved out as a missionary to the uttermost parts of the world. Then experience brought him the unique perspective and understanding of what the church needed the most. That's experience that we need to hear from. Number 5, his gospel is often recommended as a starting place. I'm talking specifically for new believers, somebody that's just coming into the word, right? You'd want him to start, maybe. We used to recommend John exclusively. Now, some people, and given the fact that they say the attention span of the American populace is under 8 seconds now, that makes pastors really, really happy. I got lost on that thought, giving voice to my anger. No, a lot of people recommend Mark because it's a book of action and they can see Jesus and he's moving from one thing to another and that's attractive. Mark's a great place to start. Any of the Gospels. Why? The same reason we push people toward John. Who is the main character? Jesus. That's who we want people to know. It's the most important character that we have to understand. And what does John write? He writes about the divinity of Jesus Christ. He is the Son of God. It's the most important thing. Jesus isn't just a good guy. And John drives that point home relentlessly. Jesus is the center. Mark, all about action. Genesis, essential foundation. Acts, what it looks like in real life. The epistles, same. Revelation, what's coming. But none of it makes sense without Jesus right smack dab in the center. And you better know who he is. Because if you are believing in another Jesus, Paul talks about this to the Galatians, you aren't following him and your salvation is in jeopardy. It matters that you know him. John got that. Number 6, last one. His nicknames are his testimony. His nicknames are his testimony. And he did write it all out. Son of Thunder to Apostle of Love. That's John's testimony. Son of Thunder is what Jesus called him and his brother. And it wasn't because they were dynamic. It's because they were bold, loud, quick-tempered, volatile, stormy. He moves from all of that, and it's not a compliment, to apostle of love. One of the things I was reading said that sometimes because everything he wrote was about love, and I don't know how this could be true, but they said sometimes they would just summarize in the early churches his letter by saying the word love and letting it rest in the congregation. People just soaking it up. I couldn't get away with that today for sure. But that's what he became known as. I think if you look at discipleship, that's pretty much somebody who passed the test, isn't it? They got all the way there. Moses, David, Solomon, just about every other author of the Bible was a mess at some time in their life or along the way in their faith journey. They all messed up. Yet God used them, chose to use them. Why? Because they represent the power of God to transform a life. John is no exception. He and his brother, nicknamed the Sons of Thunder, not because they were quiet and studious, but because they were bold and fiery. They were concerned about who was the greatest and pyrotechnics. They would have made a great addition to the megachurch today. But, by the way, if you don't get that, it's because they wanted to call fire down on people and kill them. Jesus said, down, boys. And then he's the one who's calling people to love. I just love that. We are part of something that we know more about. We have fleshed out for us more because of the Apostle John. I read a book this week called I'll Push You. Has anybody heard that story? It was a documentary, 2017, 2016, somewhere in there. The book came out in 2017, I think. I'll Push You is the story of two friends, two guys. I think they grew up in Ontario. And even starting in high school, the one guy started to get twitches and burning in his muscles, and then his feet started to drag. He had to give up tennis. And long story short, in years of testing, he didn't have ALS, but he had something called Duchenne's disease, which is a similar slow and horrific loss of muscle and muscle control. Till it got to the point where when they finally diagnosed him, he was already in a wheelchair. He was working as a graphic artist because he could still type at least a little bit. He was getting slower and slower because he was getting less and less. It got to the point where he was in a wheelchair. He could still move his head. He could still talk, but he could no longer feed himself. He couldn't dress himself. He couldn't bathe himself. He couldn't use the restroom himself. He and his wife had spent years saving up money and traveling. They wanted to make memories as much as they could. They had 3 kids. They lived down in San Diego. His best friend, all the way from childhood forward, was living up in Idaho or something, near the border. And they called each other a lot. His friend would fly down and care for his best friend for a week just to give the wife a week off from the care. And he got to watching a travel documentary on something called the El Camino. Has anybody heard of that? It's the Way of James, a 500-mile trek through Spain. It's a pilgrimage that Christians take. And it starts at one end, and if you take the whole thing, 500 miles. And part of it's pretty rough. It's a hike, okay, a serious hike. And he watched that documentary, and when his friend came to visit, he showed him the documentary, and when it was over, he said, "Do you think we could do that?" And his friend immediately responded, "I'll push you." I don't know if you understand what it takes to be able to do that, to understand what it is. They had no idea. His friend ended up moving from San Diego up to be closer to his other friend. They just wanted to be, his parents were just across the border in Canada, and they wanted to be close to their friends, close to their parents, and they started planning this trip. They had to raise the money. They decided to film it, so they had to raise the money for a film crew to go with them. They had to find a wheelchair that would be light enough. He was a 200-pound guy. They had to find a wheelchair that was light enough to be able to carry. They talked a friend into going. It was a 6-week journey. They talked a friend into going with them for the first 10 days because that's the hardest part of the trip, and they knew they'd need 2 people to carry the wheelchair up the mountain. And his friend began training. He said I could see him he was getting leaner and thinner and stronger. He worked out morning and before and after work. He was a nurse, and he worked out before and after work. They found the right wheelchair. It was $8,000. They had started to advertise for their trip, and they met with somebody who owned a factory in the town or a company, and he says, "What do you need for your trip?" They said, "Really? We need a chair." And he says, "How much is it?" $8,000. You got it. And he bought the wheelchair for him. Long story short, they get there. The friend goes with them the first 10 days. It's harder than they ever thought. Every person they met said, "No way. Can't be done. Has never been done. Can't be done." It's a 6-week journey. Long story short, they did it. But it's the stories in the middle that are so incredibly touching. They got to places, his friend pushing the wheelchair, and they would have others join them on the way, and they had rigged up a harness so that somebody would be in the front pulling with a harness and somebody would be behind, and sometimes it was somebody on either side lifting to get that chair up. They thought, we're never going to be able to do this when the guy that they had talked into going the first 10 days goes home. But every single time, God sent them somebody. And they ministered to them and they shared their life stories, and on it went until the very last part of the trip. And somehow everybody had gone ahead. Everybody wanted to finish and get to the end, and so did they. But they had to get up the last incline. And it was just the two of them. And his friend, by this time, they've been through the blister portion. They've been through, his calf muscles would knot and cramp so bad that sometimes on an incline they would go 5 steps and then he'd have to stop. They were literally inching up a mountain. And they got to one point and they thought, we can't do it. They actually went down and rested, and then they had to do it again. And they got to the spot, and he said, I just can't. I can't do it. And his friend looked at him, he said, it's okay. We'll take a cab to the flat portion of the rest of the trail. They thought they were going to have to abandon doing the whole thing. They're on the hill. His friend is just braced at the back of it so he doesn't go backwards. And a car goes by on the road within sight, pulls back behind him, opens the door and yells, hold on, I'm coming. And the guy races up the hill and begins to push him the rest of the way. And it's just incredible. But everything changed on that trip. The guy knew the prognosis was he will die from this disease. It'll cause something that causes him to die. It will be the reason behind it. The tremendous humility it took for him to be cared for in the way that he had to be by his friend. The incredible sacrifice of his friend. But along the way that they ministered to other people and the way that they saw what happens when people love one another and selflessly give to one another just completely changed their lives. They went back, both quit their jobs. They started their own company, and they began to help others and give talks, and on and on and on and on and on it went. But what they found on that trail is something I think John found in 3 years with the one who loves like none other. And that became the thing that he wanted the church to get. Have you responded lately, I'll push you, to anybody? I don't know what it means. I don't know if you need to supply something that's needed. I don't know if you need to push them to do something they're not willing to do. I don't know if you need to push them to step out. I don't know if you need to push them to accept help. I don't know if you need to push yourself to be in that position where you recognize you can't do it all and you have to have others come alongside. But I think it's a pretty good mantra for us. I'll push you. Can we say it without hesitation? I think the more we get what John got, the easier those words will be. Let's pray. Father, thank you today for being with us and encouraging us, Lord, through the lives of these authors. God, we know the stories, we know the lives, and yet we really, really haven't begun to scratch the surface. There's nuances and things that we haven't thought about. Can we name Mary as the one that he took in? Sure we can, but have we thought about what John gleaned from her being in his household? Have we thought about what it means to have been transformed from somebody known for blowing up to becoming the person who's known as the one who loves? Father, I pray that we would get it, that we would be it, that your love would flow through us in such magnificent ways, that we would have the eyes of Luke in the heart of John, who have your eyes in your heart. And we would leave the things that need to be left and push on toward the things that you have for us. In Jesus' name, amen.